Okay, cool. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Oakland Heritage Alliance Zoom lecture. I think this is our fourth or fifth one, I think. And from what I remember, I think, Kathleen, you had done our first one with a partnership with the Oakland Public Library. I think it was the women's clubs.
Yep, the women's clubs.
So we're definitely happy to have you back to talk about candy. And one of the things that I learned about Kathleen yesterday was, she's a very avid researcher and researches topics that, she doesn't necessarily know a whole lot about at the beginning. So that's really cool that you have that skill to learn about things at Oakland's various resources and to find out information.
It's the thrill of the hunt.
Yeah, so that's really cool and a very admirable skill. So with that, I will hand it over to Kathleen. If you guys have questions during the presentation, feel free to type them into the chat. And as with our previous lectures, I'll collect them during the presentation and ask them to Kathleen at the end. So without further ado.
All right, I'm going to, yes. Here we go. Does it look good?
It's good.
Okay, very good. So thank you to OHA for this opportunity to share a hobby horse of mine, and also, and for your technical assistance with the program committee. Special thanks, though, right now, off the top, to the Oakland History Center for being open in this last few months of the pandemic, to the Ascension Historical Society at the Greek Orthodox Cathedral in Oakland, and especially to Carolyn Sakis for photographs from the AHS collection and for her help researching Greeks in Oakland's candy business. And big, huge thanks to Ed Clausen for searching in his paper ephemera collections and sharing paper ephemera with me. This production would be a lot less visually interesting if it weren't for Ed. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Did you know that at one time, Oakland, California was a center for candy manufacturing on the West Coast? I did not know that. The Candy Manufacturers Associations touted this at great length, and we are going to explore some of the candy makers of Oakland. I want to start out by saying this is not comprehensive. I am definitely leaving out wholesale candy wholesalers because we'd be here all night and could not possibly cover the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of neighborhood candy stores that stretched from Elmhurst to North Oakland, from the hills to the water. There are too many to mention, but you'll hear about a few of them. Well, there we go. Okay, the first appearance of a confectioner in the Oakland City directories was in 1872, a Mr. J.P. Stockwell, dealer in choice confectionery, fruit and nuts, canned fruits, jellies, oysters, etc., goods delivered to all parts of the city and Brooklyn free of charge. First appearance. And the first year that a classified advertising appeared in the Oakland City directories in a classified section like the Yellow Pages did not occur until the 1877-78 city directory. This Mr. Stockwell did not appear in that one. Oh, and to back up just a moment, there were undoubtedly before 1872 candy stores in Oakland, but short of scanning page by page by page through the city directories, they would be impossible to identify. But in the first classified section of the city directory, 1877, 1878, there were 19 other confectioners, 19 listed, including our next one, Bacon's Palace of Sweets. Bacon's was opened in 1872 by James H. Bacon in the old Delger block, which was between 9th and 10th Streets on Broadway. The Oakland Tribune gushed that Bacon sold homemade candies and fine chocolates made on the premises. And here's a further quote: "Every design and novelty in the candy line suitable for gifts may be had at this store, and only the purest material is sold over the counters." Bacon's Palace was popular with Oaklanders for years, even as candy stores multiplied downtown and in the neighborhoods. He was a regular advertiser in the newspapers, as you see on these slides. And these are both from 1875. And he also published, as they did, advertising cards. I think that the one with the little boy with the monkey is particularly sweet. This was a common form of advertising in the 19th century. Business was sweet for Bacon until things went off the rails. Over the summer of 1891, Mr. Bacon sold the candy business to the Reuter brothers, and in a bizarre incident reported by the Tribune on September the 16th, Bacon managed to get stuck in Lake Merritt's mud overnight until he was rescued the following morning. No one knew what to make of this widely reported and very peculiar episode, but 2 weeks later, on September 21st, James Bacon checked into a hotel in San Francisco where a chambermaid found him hanged the next morning. The San Francisco Call and the Oakland Tribune reported all the lurid details. It turned out that Bacon was deeply in debt, though the reason for the debt was not entirely clear, except for investments in real estate. What did he do with the money, they asked. One writer speculated that the Lake Merritt episode might have been a suicide attempt. Under the Reuter brothers and other proprietors later, the business continued until 1911, until by then it was eclipsed by the candy maker up the street, Leonard's, at 1309 Broadway. So from 1887 to the late 1930s, Leonard's was a huge name in the Oakland candy business. Emile Leonard was born in New York and was brought to San Francisco as a child. He trained as a watchmaker, a trade that he pursued for about a decade. In 1887, he opened his confectionery and ice cream establishment in what was then called the Park Block on 14th Street between Broadway and Washington, across from City Hall. He had 3 employees. By 1895, business had expanded so much that he relocated around the corner in the Delger block. That's this slide that you're looking at. Not the same Delger block as the one that Mr. Bacon was in, but the newer Delger block on Broadway between 13th and 14th on the west side of the street, what is now City Center. Maybe it was Emile Leonard's training as a watchmaker that led to the beautiful jewel box-like appearance of the interior of Leonard's, as you see in these lovely postcards. He was quite a self-promoter. Emile Leonard, like James Bacon, Emile Leonard was also a suicide. He died in January of 1912. The San Francisco Call ran the headline, "Rich but weary of life," followed by a gruesome description of the suicide, which was in the basement of the store. His body was found by his son-in-law, who happened to be the manager of the building at the time. Oop, wrong slide. I went too fast. Within weeks of Emile Leonard's death, his wife, Hattie Leonard, took over the business, the management of the business herself, which she continued to do for 17 years until she sold the business and retired in 1929. One of the first things she did when she took over management of the business was to continue Emile's plan to build a factory at 2400 Grove Street. He had completed the purchase of the land in the very weeks before his death. That factory, by the way, is under the Grove Shafter Freeway. It's on the east. It was on the east side of what is now Martin Luther King. And that building no longer exists. A very busy and capable woman, Hattie Leonard, served on the county grand jury in 1924, which was deeply involved in the construction of Highland Hospital, while at the same time running this business. In October of 1929, about 2 weeks before the great stock market crash, the Oakland Tribune announced a new building that was going to go in on the west side of Broadway between 13th and 14th in the location now occupied by Leonard's for the past 31 years. The old Delger building was being sold by the Delger descendants for, this is 1929, mind you, $500,000. According to this article, Mrs. Leonard was going to close the retail store but continue her manufacturing business, but instead she had actually already sold the business to a William J. Mitchell, who carried on the wholesale business at the Grove Street plant. Leonard's was reorganized in 1933. Oops. And around that time, a new retail shop opened at 3246 Telegraph. The last newspaper advertisement for Leonard's appeared in 1938. It dwindled away, product of the Depression. It's very hard to tell when you don't see, when you can't find evidence for the closings of businesses. Before we go on, here are a couple of fun facts about the extended Leonard family. Edna Leonard Stoddard, who was Emile and Hattie's daughter, was a well-known artist in her day. Her 1967 obituary related that at CCAC, she studied with David Park, Jean Varda, and Mark Rothko. And at the time of her death, she was married to the Society of Six artist Louis Segrist. Another fun fact, Hattie Leonard's sister, Ruth Marcus Earp, was the wife of Wyatt Earp. It's always a much smaller world than you think it is. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, candy stores and candy makers popped up all over the city. We lived much more in our neighborhoods then than we do now, so it is not surprising that in 1891, there were 29 of them. In 1900, there were 26. In 1910, there were 69 of them. And in a slide that I will get to in a moment, in 1917, there were 98. Oh. Am I missing a slide? Excuse me a moment. The slide failed to print. Well, I can fix that. That's terrible. It didn't come out of the printer. Here's another, oh, this is the menu for the Excelsior candy store. As you can see, candies, ice cream, and cigars. 3 things that go together. And also shows that, that many candy stores and ice cream stores would sell you a light lunch to go with your ice cream and your fountain menu. And, you know, who doesn't like kittens, right? And here is a candy shop that was out on East 14th Street in the late teens by the look of the clothing that people are wearing. And as I said, in 1917, there were 10 wholesale or manufacturing confectioners in Oakland and 98 retail candy stores listed that year. That's just Oakland. That doesn't even include Berkeley or Alameda. One of the interesting discoveries that I made in looking at this 1917 city directory was a Japanese name, Fujiya. Fujiya Company. This came as a surprise to me, but that surprise took me to a website on California's Japantowns, which told me that in 1910 there were 1,500 Japanese and Japanese Americans in Oakland, and by 1940, just before the start of the Second World War, 1,800. And that Oakland was the 5th largest Japantown in the state of California. So the Japanese community was big enough to support a confectioner in those years. It took some digging, quite a bit of digging through the city directories to finally find a year in which the proprietor of this company was listed, a Chohei Kawano. And I was able to track him in the city directories and through the magic of the ancestry databases back to his departure from Japan in 1903 from the port of Yokohama. He seems to have spent a few years in Honolulu and then a few years in San Francisco. The first year that Fujiya Company appears in the Oakland city directories was 1912. And, you know, given the vagaries of the city directories, the business might have been there a little bit before that, but was definitely in place between 1912 and the last year that it was listed, 1930. So a run of practically 20 years on this confectionery shop. Mr. Kawano lived around the corner. The business was initially at 413 7th, which is between Franklin and Webster. And then a little later, he moves kind of kitty corner to the 700 block of Webster, where the business remains until it closes. Besides his name and the names of his wife and his children, I don't know much. I haven't been able to turn up much else about him. He did die in 1939, according to the California Death Index. But unfortunately, there was no obituary or death notice in the English language newspapers. So if anybody knows anything about the Kawano family, leave it in the chat box. It would be marvelous, absolutely marvelous to see that, if we can. So Margaret Burnham's Cottage Candies. This was the business that got me interested in the candy business in Oakland. We see that in the Oakland city directories in 1922 lists the Margaret Burnham for the first time with this candy store. This building is at the corner of Piedmont Avenue and Yosemite. The building is still there today. The facade has been changed, but if you stand at that corner, which is across the street from the Kaiser Hospital parking garage, you will see the very, very distinctive roof lines that are still in place. So the first year that she advertised, that this business is advertised, it has 3 locations. This central kitchen and shop at 3800 Piedmont Avenue, a shop at 2213 Broadway, and a Berkeley shop on Alston Way. In that same year, actually 1923, the business listed these 2 classified advertisements. They're looking for a sales lady, and they are looking for an experienced chocolate dipper for the business. By 1923, Margaret Burnham Cottage Candies had a wholesale business going on as well. Shoppers could buy these treats at local groceries like Skaggs, as evidenced by the Skaggs advertisements, in addition to the freestanding shops. Along about 1925, Margaret Burnham sells the business to a George P. Balicki, who was listed as president and manager of the company. according to his obituary and his son's obituary, George Balaky brought the family to Oakland in 1925 when he bought this going concern, which brings to light what was an interesting research issue for me. Over and over and over again, I was looking at secondary sources on this business, Oakland Tribune mostly, but other secondary sources as well that said that George Balaky was the founder of this business. Well, as it turns out, this was a confection itself as part of an essay that Balaky wrote in 1930 on the occasion of the opening of this building, the one that we now think of as Hooper's, in which he says that he founded the building in 1925. When in fact, the proof is there that the building existed first, and his family attests to it as well. But you can give him a lot of credit for being a shrewd businessman, very keen on business expansion, to give him his due. Very astute businessman. He continued to add locations and to place his candies in grocery stores. In 1930, he opened this candy cottage on the left, what we think of as Hooper's. And in 1931, the storefront cottage on the right, which was in the old I. Magnin building on Broadway, and which was kind of a spot for candy, but also for lunch when you were out shopping. Very swishy, full page announcement in the Tribune when that one opened. And among the other cottages, here's the one that was in the Glen building on Broadway between 13th and 14th. Who recognizes that building? It's still there. What's in that building? Oh, it's DeLauer's Super Newsstand. And that's kind of a thrill. Except for the 3800 Piedmont Avenue cottage and the Telegraph Avenue cottage, which were both freestanding, all of the other candy cottages were opened in storefronts like these. You can also see there is one on Grand Avenue that where the storefront still exists, and others if you look. And here's a wonderful thing. In 1926, George Balaky trumpeted that he was having an exact replica of the candy cottage built on a Ford truck chassis for local deliveries, to be complete in every detail. I looked and looked and looked for this, knowing that if it had been built, Balaky would surely have capitalized on it. But lo, and thank you, Ed Clausen. Here is a Margaret Burnham postcard of the Telegraph Avenue shop. And look, there in the lower left-hand corner is the Candymobile. So Balaky must have not built it in 1926, but instead built it for the Telegraph Avenue location. It's very exciting to see that. George Balaky sold the candy business and retired in the late 1930s. That buyer's name went unrecorded, but in 1952, that party sold all 19 locations to the McFarland Candy Company. McFarland's operated some of the Burnham locations until the early 1960s, when, like Lennart's and other candy businesses, they just seemed to fade away. But Hooper's. In 1952, the Burnham owners at that time sold the 4632 Telegraph Avenue location to Gordon Hooper. Hooper's later expanded to a second store in Alameda. They sold delicious hand-dipped chocolates that were made in the little factory in the back that had previously been the production room for the Burnham cottages. Hooper's sold not only in their own candy store, but in other locations too, like Guy's Drugs and Capwell's. Those in the know bought bags of Hooper's Bloopers, at least this was in the 90s, so maybe it was the subsequent owner, candies that were not quite pretty enough for the main display cases. The iconic pink and white paint scheme on the building was chosen reportedly because Barbara Hooper loved the color pink. On December the 5th, 1957, Hooper's was featured on a KGO TV segment called Success Story on the free enterprise system, and Hooper's celebrated with a big Tribune ad. This is only the top third. And here is a list of some of the Hooper's candies. Victoria Creams, Pecan Caramel Hoopy Doops, Petite Chocolate Truffle Mints, Sticks, and 50 other sorts. Gordon Hooper died in 1988. The family sold the business 2 years later in 1990. Candy making continued until about 2011 by other entities. And since then, there have been variously a skateboard shop, a holiday pop-up, an antique store. It appears to be untenanted at the time, but if anybody on the call can provide an update, please, please, please put it in the chat box. Another big Oakland candy business, wholesale business, was Cardinay, home of the Uno and Abba Zaba bars. They were a very venerable Oakland candy business, in business from the early teens of the last century until its sale to Hayward's Annabelle Candies in 1978. It was founded by brothers George and Emile Cardinay, who were the children of California pioneers. They started out in West Oakland on Kirkham, and then moved in 1919 to 22nd Street, or to Market Street between Lydia and 22nd, which is now West Grand. And here are their delivery trucks. They co-branded with Studebaker on their trucks. And there is a quite splashy Oakland Tribune ad that I have not included to that effect. As to their location, and here it is, on Market near West Grand, then 22nd Street, Cardinay fought City Hall and won. In 1940, the city wanted to widen 22nd Street. And after a lot of pushback from the Cardinay company, they backed down and rerouted the expansion of the street. The product line had changed over the years. Here on the left is a 1912 ad for a candy called Texas Tommy. I have looked and looked, but I haven't been able to figure out what that was. But I can tell you that they sold baseball cards with Texas Tommy, and that those Cardinay Texas Tommy baseball cards are in the collector's market and big. They also made the now discontinued Baffle Bar, which was some kind of chocolate fudge nut confection that lasted for quite a while, but not a thing that you can get anymore. They also made a candy that you'll see later in the slideshow called Knob Hills. And these were patented. I've seen the patent record for these candies. Nuts and chocolate surrounding a fruit cream center. They advertised widely in the local newspapers, and they sponsored local radio broadcasts as well. This was always a wholesale business and did not have an actual store like Burnham's or Leonard's. This is Peanut Andy, the mascot of the Martin M. Hoffman Company. Here is a picture of Hoffman's building on Webster Street on the right between 13th and 14th. And also on the left, a picture of the roof of their, I think their 13th Street location, looking toward the Central Bank building. I love this. According to a nave column in the Oakland Tribune, that sign that we see from the rear was electric. And also, I think you can see the back of it right here, also featured an animated Peanut Andy. And this shown in Oakland from the 1920s until 1937. Peanut Andy was trademarked. The business was founded by Martin M. Hoffman in 1896. Peanut Andy entered the scene 8 years later. Before World War II's sugar shortages, I'll keep coming back to that. Before World War II's sugar shortages crippled the candy industry, Peanut Andy was ubiquitous on the Pacific Coast. Hoffman himself only retired in 1946, closing the building at that time. Peanut Andy and the Hoffman Candy Company were famous for their free parties. Candy Day, I'll talk about National Candy Day later, but beyond Candy Day, Hoffman sponsored a free candy day in the Southern Pacific, what was then called the Southern Pacific lot, where the trains came through in the block between 13th and 14th and Franklin and Webster, which was the merchant's parking garage, and which is now a high rise. Yeah, this is pretty girls will give away candy and Hawaiian musicians will play. I don't think you could do an ad like that today. What do you think? But it was by way of Peanut Andy and that advertising that I became aware of this phenomenon. National Candy Day. So this event first turned up in advertising in the Oakland Tribune in October of 1921, where Oakland confectioners promoted their wares. According to a recent article in the Atlantic magazine, this was a fake holiday cooked up by the candy industry in 1916 to promote candy sales between Easter and Christmas. Not Halloween, mind you, it was the first half of October. But in fact, according to a different Atlantic article, candy and Halloween didn't really team up until the 1950s, and trick-or-treating wasn't common at all in the United States until the late 1930s or early 40s. And at that time, coins, fruit, or homemade goodies predominated. National Candy Day really didn't get much traction until 1921 with World War I and the last pandemic being over. Candy trade associations pushed this hard, providing promotional material and text to candy retailers and manufacturers, going so far as to, look at that, promote candy's nutritional value. Yep. Medium for quieting squalling infants, winning a maiden's favor, or appeasing the wrath of a hostile wife. Get that. Oakland candy makers made a big push. The next year, 1922, National Candy Day coincided with a big manufacturers exposition at Idora Park, leading to another huge promotional push, including big candy giveaways. Like, oh, here are ads from Oakland candy shops. Big candy giveaways like this one from Cardinay, featuring Nob Hills, where they gave away thousands of Nob Hills at Idora Park. Oakland department stores that had candy counters like Conn's, Whitthorne, and Swan, Montgomery Ward, and Skaggs joined in with reminders to buy bunches of candy. And here was Peanut Andy on National Candy Day, right there at the lawn of the Southern Pacific Park. One of the big surprises while researching this talk and looking through city directory after city directory was the large number of Greek surnames that I kept finding in the city directories listed among the confectioners. As a proud member of the Greek American Interlocking Directorate myself, maybe I should not have been so surprised. We tend to associate Greek Americans with the restaurant business, but it's less well known that Greek Americans dominated candy and ice cream businesses in the first half of the 20th century. It was the time-proven tradition of one man bringing another into the business and spinning that person off to form another business. over and over and over again, starting in Chicago in 1873, as far as can be documented. This Hall of Fame includes the founders of Dove Bar and Carvel's Ice Cream. In Oakland, the vanguard Candyman was James Leckus. This was the stamp that he put on candy boxes, who appears in city directories in the 1890s. Ultimately, Leckus branched out from retail candy making to wholesale candies with a factory on Market Street. This picture that I'm showing you here is, I think, particularly interesting from Leckus Candies. This is dramatically post-San Francisco earthquake. You can see, I think, that the glass, there's glass in the window on this side and there's no glass here. And you see all the glass on the sidewalk. And the short little fellow in the middle with the broom was the founder, James Leckus. In the 1910 city directory, just to use a random year, and I'm going to go through some slides as I read off these names. Oh, here's the Leckus wholesale operation on Market Street with their truck. In 1910, confectioners with Greek surnames included, besides Leckus, Barashus, Katsouris, 3 members of the Eliopoulos family at 3 different locations, Cardassus, 2 Kokorises, 2 Lucases, Macres, Malos and Vamvakaris, Meros, he was in Piedmont Park, 2 Papa Georges, one of whom was Father Papa George, who I think was the first priest in the Oakland community, Pezus and Sartel. Later, there were many, many other families as well. As with so many other candy businesses, the Second World War and its sugar restrictions just clobbered these businesses, as did consolidation in the candy business in the 1950s and 60s, and they slowly vanished, their children and their grandchildren entering other professions and lines of work. It was a conversation with members of the Ascension Historical Society about Greeks in the candy business, in which Marge Phillips, a member of the group, told an anecdote from her childhood in Oakland. Her father, Nick Gasumis, and her mother, Zacharo Gasumis, were the proprietors of a candy store in Diamond. Right there. And by the way, Zacharo in Greek is the word for sugar, and isn't that sweet? Marge said that her father made the candy at home and sold it in the store that was next to a movie theater. People bought candy and took it into the movie theater. And she and her brother would sneak the candy from the garage before it went over to the movie theater. And I thought we were the only ones who snuck candy into the movies. But no, it turns out that in the early decades of the movies, theater lobbies didn't have candy concession counters. They were considered to be kind of down market. And not up to the tone that theater owners hoped to encourage. But candy stores often popped up near theaters, push carts sold snacks outside, and sometimes concessionaires sold candy or popcorn inside the theater, the way we might buy popcorn at the ballpark. Don't believe me? Here are a couple of slides. This is the Capitol Theater, 1925 roughly, Foothill at Seminary, and here you can see candy right next door. And where's my other movie theater? And there was, well, somehow a slide disappeared. Puzzling. Okay, what about candy makers today? Here are just a few of today's Oakland candy makers. I know I am leaving candy makers out. These were the easy grabs. If you know of others, please share in the chat box. And this concludes the organized part of my talk. We can open the chat box to questions, which I hope I can answer. And thank you all.
Thank you, Kathleen, for this really amazing presentation. It's definitely another view into Oakland, so it's cool to see all your research and stuff like that. Can you talk a little bit about your research and sources and sort of the process of navigating a topic that you weren't initially familiar with?
I did a tremendous amount of work in Oakland city directories to identify names of businesses, spans of time that businesses were in operation. The Oakland History Room was, when I could get there, was invaluable for this. The Oakland city directories have been digitized. They are many of them are on Internet Archive. And it is, I don't know if any participants have tried doing this, but as with anything that is linear, the way a directory is, all that clicking, click forward, click back, which page, more pages, go back, go forward. It is tremendously time consuming to do when, if you are standing in front of a physical directory, you can just pop it open and then flip forward and backward. It is much easier to navigate. So I used the city directories. I used the digitized newspapers. The Oakland Tribune has been digitized and is available online from its beginning up until 1966, if you're using newspapers.com at the Oakland Public Library, and to 1977, if you are using Newspaper Archive through the San Francisco Public Library. Just a tip, get more than one library card if you're doing research, because you need more than one institution. I used, the newspapers were great. I used, track down business names, which is the way that I ended up with the suicides of Mr. Bacon and Mr. Leonard, and how I found Hattie Leonard. And then you just start, Dr. Google is there. You find something interesting and you start creating the little branches of the tree. I did get tremendous amount of use out of an oral history from the Ascension Historical Society that was recorded in the late 1980s of Gus Leckus, who was a member of the candy making Leckus family, in which he talked about his experiences in the business. Photographs came from the Oakland History Room collections, but also just grabs from wherever I could find them. So that's part of the process. I love research. It's the thrill of the hunt. So I do try to dig deeply, and I do try to verify. Yeah, I do try to verify.
Great.
Shall I stop screen sharing so I can see some of?
Sure.
Yeah, let's.
We had a few other questions in the chat. I bet
you did. Yeah. So.
I think Brian Shea had a question about the Bacon's ad from the 5 local makers. It says one of the ads said 5 local makers, and then the Tribune said made on the premises. I think that was one of your initial slides.
He did both.
Okay.
He did both, and it was a little hard to parse out. Yes, the puffy piece that ran in the Tribune was made here on the premises, but a lot of his advertising, especially the Christmas advertising, the advertising indicates that he's getting his candy from confectioners in San Francisco. So he did both.
Great. We had one comment from James Lee. I would like to try the chop suey sundae from the Excelsior candy store.
Yes, and have a cigar to go with it.
Yeah. Let's see. I think we had one other question about what an egg lemonade is. It was answered in the chat. So if you guys want to check that out, if you beat the egg thoroughly and add the sugar and lemon juice, add the water slowly, stirring until smooth and well mixed, strain and stir.
It doesn't curdle?
I guess not.
Ooh. Okay.
Let's see. I think that was our last
I see.
question.
Dean
I might have missed
got
some.
A question about Louis Lemert. Oh, we love the ad boasting the health benefits of chocolate. Where can we get a copy? I can tell you. For the person looking for the health benefits of chocolate, this appeared in the Oakland Tribune on October the 4th, 1921, page 8.
Great. We had one question about Edie's. Someone recall, Jean Quirk recall the place named Edie's?
Yes, Edie's. Edie's was a local candy and ice cream business. They were certainly in Berkeley as late as the late 70s and early 80s, because I went to Edie's. Oh, Chris Patillo has her hand up. Chris, unmute yourself, or
My father used to take my mother to Edie's on dates quite regularly. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, somebody mentions Jelly Bellies. Yes. Golitz Candy Company was one of the companies I really didn't have time to cover. That company was founded in Chicago, and Herman Golitz came from, and they were quite big. They were in the 19th century, they were developers of a candy that's generically called a mellow cream. And that's the kind of candy that candy corn is a form of mellow cream. They came out to California and continued the business. It was always strictly another one that was always strictly a wholesale business. They developed the thing that makes Jelly Bellies unique is that the flavor is not just on the outside, the flavor is in the inside of jelly bean. We can thank Ronald Reagan for popularizing them, because he famously always had a little jar of them on his desk when he was governor and when he was president. The company expanded and expanded, and in, I think, the 70s, they moved to Fairfield, where their great big plant is today. I think that was in the 70s. But yes, that's an Oakland-based company. They were always wholesale. Kyoto is another one that was in Oakland from the 30s to, I can't remember when they ceased operation. Also the kind of candy that you would buy, say, in a bag on a rack at the CVS.
Cool.
Yeah,
I think Lisa,
Dryers and Edie's, yeah.
I think Lisa Heyer had a question or a comment, and maybe we'll take that and then we'll close out.
Okay.
Well, it's just interesting that in the oral history that Johnny Heinhold gives before he dies in the early 30s, he talks about selling candy and cigars at Heinhold's during Prohibition. And so now I'm really curious to
were
know,
they candy and cigars?
well, no, I think it was legitimately candy, but clearly there were lots of places he could have gone to get candy.
Absolutely.
You know.
There were all kinds of local wholesalers. At some point, I can't remember, in the 1920s, I ran across an article that said very explicitly that Oakland was a real center for West Coast candy making. Lots of companies.
Yeah, because Johnny the question was, did he ever sell liquor illegally during Prohibition? Because most bars did to stay afloat. Yeah. And he said, no, I couldn't do that. But I did sell a lot of candy. And I suspect he was, Johnny was a pretty upright guy. So, but it's just interesting. It was always struck me as a strange thing for a bar to sell to get through Prohibition. But clearly with all the sources right there, it made good sense. And people would get it on the train. They'd run over to Johnny's and buy candy for their train trip.
But let's see, somebody asks, when did the Candy Cottage on Telegraph close? 2018 maybe. Does it, I don't know when. I mean, certainly the Hooper's business closed under the Hooper's name in about 2011. Whoever the candy maker was that was making candy under the Hooper's name after the family sold continued until about 2011. And somebody else asks, when did Margaret Burnham's on Piedmont Avenue close? George Balicki closed the original location at 3800 Piedmont Avenue in 1938. And at that time, he moved all of the candy production to the Telegraph Avenue store. And here's just another one of these fun facts about these families is that George Cardenet, who was the son of the founder of Cardenet Candies, was, after he retired from the family business, moved out to the boonies out in the hills outside of Concord and was a tremendous horseman. And there are trails named for him. There's a trail in the East Bay Hills in Contra Costa named for him. And I believe also in Washington State, he was a tremendous advocate for the development of trails.
Great. Thank you everyone for your questions. All right, let's close out.
I hope people were, oh yes, Temescal Community Foundation Thrift Shop. Yes, it was that. Briefly, I think the building is untenanted at the time. It would be great. I know the retail environment isn't wonderful right now, but wouldn't it be great to get somebody in that building? I hope you've been entertained. Oh, Sue Getroyer has her hand up. Hi, Sue.
Hi. Did they tend to combine candy making with ice cream or no?
Often, especially if there was a freestanding shop, it was candy and ice cream. So that was pretty typical.
I know Lord's, Coolidge and MacArthur had candy for a while until maybe 10 years ago or so.
Yeah, Lenart's had ice cream, but a lot of the Greek ones did candy and ice cream. You know, people lived more in their neighborhoods, so there were just, folks weren't, you know, buying from Amazon or going to a big box store. You did all your shopping. In your neighborhood. Hence,
and did they have air conditioning? I mean, I know it didn't used to be like this, but it only takes a day to wreck everything.
They had refrigeration.
But if they had a day like today, everything would melt if they didn't have AC.
Yeah, I don't know the answer, and I don't know the point at which AC got to be ubiquitous. It's a good question.
Cool, thank you. Let's talk about some of our upcoming events. Thank you so much, Kathleen, for this wonderful presentation and the great Q&A. This is really great. Let's see, hopefully you can see my screen. A couple of upcoming events. The first one is on this Saturday. It's not our event, but we thought we would amplify it since it seems like a really great event. It's a Black Liberation walking tour. It's the kickoff to a self-guided tour in West Oakland, put off by the Friends of the Hoover Durant Public Library for Juneteenth. So that is being kicked off on Saturday from 11 to 4 p.m. It seems like it'll be kind of like a block party kind of thing. And a few of our board members have gone on the tour and have said that it's really great. Walking tours, we're actively looking at walking tours. We're hoping to have around 6 tours sometime in July and August and September. So keep your schedules open for that and your ears open to our emails and newsletters to discuss that. Preservation action, we're looking at the Howard Terminal Ballpark. There's a big vote coming up July 20th at the City Council. Downtown plan, CCA redevelopment. So these are just things that we're actively looking at and advocating for from a preservation perspective on all your behalf. So thanks for supporting OHA. And other ways that you can support OHA and be in touch are just to become a member. You know, your membership helps us keep our office running, keeps things going, allows us to advocate for you. You get our newsletter, discounts to tours and programs and things like that. And you support events like this. And yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for coming. And Kathleen, I don't know if you want to say any last words, or if there's a way that people can get in touch with you if they have additional questions or excitement around candy.
Yeah, people can reach out to me through the OHA office if they would like. Thank you, OHA. All of you who are not members, join OHA. It is your membership and support of OHA that keeps these programs going and that supports preservation efforts in Oakland. This happens because people become members and go on the walking tours when they start to happen again, because they're very fun.
Thank you.
And thanks again, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for coming, and have a good night.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.